Welcome to Cheating Wives Among Us. The worst day of your life doesn't announce itself. You wake up, you go to work, and somewhere between coffee and lunch, the floor drops out. This is Nate's story. Let's begin. So here's the thing nobody tells you about the worst day of your life. You don't know it's the worst day until you're already in it. There's no alarm, no change in the weather. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you drive to work, and somewhere between your second cup of coffee and lunch, the floor drops out. And I mean that literally. I work on elevators. I know what it looks like when a cable snaps. I know the sound. There's a split second where everything is still holding, and then there's the moment it isn't, and you can't unhear it. October 8th was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays I usually run the East Side route, apartment buildings in Euclid, a couple of parking garages downtown. But that morning, my dispatcher called and said a freight elevator at a warehouse in Lakewood was throwing fault codes, so I swapped. Turned out to be a relay issue. 15-minute fix on what they'd budgeted me 3 hours for. So I'm pulling into my own driveway at 2:15 in the afternoon, which almost never happens, thinking maybe I'll catch the last few innings of whatever replay ESPN's running. Kelsey's car wasn't there. That was the first thing. Small thing. Barely registered. She'd told me she was working from home that day, but people run errands. People grab coffee. I didn't think about it. I walked in, dropped my keys on the counter, and saw her laptop open on the kitchen table. Screen bright. I wasn't going to read it. I want to be clear about that because later, when everything came apart, she tried to make it about me snooping, me violating her privacy, me going through her things. I was closing the lid. That's it. I was being a decent husband who didn't want the screen burning out while she was gone. But the email was right there. It was from a place called Lakeview Fertility Partners in Akron. Not Cleveland, not the clinic we'd been going to for 3 years, the one where I'd held her hand through 2 rounds of IVF and watched the light drain from her face when the numbers came back wrong. This was somewhere else. Somewhere I'd never heard of. The subject line read, "Appointment confirmation, selected donor." I should have closed the laptop. I know that. But you know that feeling when you're running a diagnostic on a motor and one reading comes back off and your whole body goes still because you know that one bad number means something behind the wall is wrong? That's what happened. Every nerve I had went quiet, and I sat down and I read 3 months of emails. 3 months. She'd been corresponding with this clinic since July, and it was October, while we were scheduling our 3rd IVF round, while I was giving her the hormone injections every night in the kitchen, holding the syringe at the angle the nurse showed me, rubbing the spot with my thumb afterward because she said it helped with the bruising, while she was taping the ovulation schedule to the fridge with the little magnets shaped like sunflowers that she bought at a craft fair. While all of that was happening, she was shopping for a different man's DNA, donor number 4471. That's what the profile said, 6'1", blue eyes, MBA from some school I didn't catch because my vision was starting to blur. Scandinavian descent, athletic build, played piano. I'm 5'9", brown eyes. I fix elevators for a living. I never went to college. The only instrument I ever played was a recorder in 4th grade, and I was bad at it. She didn't just pick a donor, she picked my replacement. Taller, smarter, bluer-eyed, everything she apparently wished she'd married, and I might have been able to swallow that maybe if it had been a conversation. If she'd sat me down and said, "Nate, I'm scared the IVF won't work and I want to talk about other options," I would have listened. I would have hurt, sure, but I would have listened. That's what you do. But that's not what she did. There was an email, the one that put a crack down the center of my chest, where she asked the clinic coordinator if the donor procedure could be timed to coincide with our IVF cycle at Cleveland Reproductive, so that if she got pregnant, I'd think it was ours, mine and hers. She was going to let me stand in that delivery room, hold that baby, cry those tears, and every single second of it would have been a lie. She'd have watched me fall in love with a child and known the whole time that I wasn't really the father. She'd have taken that to her grave and smiled through it. I read the emails 3 times. Then I did something that tells you a lot about what kind of man I am, or at least what kind of man I became in that kitchen. I took out my phone and I photographed every single email, 12 screenshots. Then I closed the laptop exactly as it was. Same angle, same brightness. I even checked where the cursor was sitting on the screen. I set it down, and I backed away from it like it was a crime scene, because it was. I walked outside, got in my truck, turned the key just enough to hear the dash click on, but not the engine. And I sat there. 45 minutes, maybe more. I watched a neighbor's sprinkler go back and forth across a lawn that was already too wet. A kid rode by on a bike that was too big for him, standing on the pedals because he couldn't reach the seat. The mailman came and went. The world kept going. It didn't know. I kept thinking about this one elevator I serviced years ago at a hotel in Beechwood. Old Otis unit, probably from the 70s. Everything looked fine on the surface, clean cab, nice doors, smooth ride. But I pulled the panel and the main cable was frayed to about 40% integrity. That elevator was one bad day from dropping 8 floors with someone's grandmother inside. The whole building was riding on something rotten, and nobody could see it because the doors were polished. That was my marriage. I started the engine. Troy Dunn lives in a ranch house in Brook Park that he bought after his divorce 3 years ago. The garage is his church, always has been. That night he was in there rewiring the radio in a '69 Camaro he'd been restoring since Clinton was in office. The thing will never run. We both know it. But Troy doesn't restore cars to drive them. He restores them because he needs something to do with his hands while his brain works through whatever's eating him. I pulled into his driveway around 7, walked into the garage without knocking, because that's how it works with us. He looked up from the dash harness, saw my face, and put down his wire strippers. "Sit," he said, nodding at the overturned bucket in the corner. I sat, and I told him everything, the emails, the donor, the timing plan, the 3 months of deception. I laid it all out, flat and factual, the way you'd describe a system failure to a building manager. No yelling, no tears, just the sequence of events. Troy listened without interrupting. He's good at that. Most people aren't. Most people start talking before you're done because they're already composing their response, but Troy just watches you with those flat gray eyes of his and waits until you've run out of words. When I finished, he leaned back against the Camaro's fender and crossed his arms. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet." I rubbed the back of my neck. The skin was tight, like it gets before a headache. "But I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to raise a child that's built on a lie." He nodded slowly. "Is there any chance she would have told you? Eventually?" "She asked the clinic how to time it, so I'd never find out. That's not someone who's working up to a confession, Troy. That's someone who's building a vault." He was quiet for a while. Picked up a rag, wiped his hands even though they weren't dirty. Then he said something I've never forgotten. "You're married to an HR manager, brother. She writes people up for a living. She documents. She builds narratives. She controls who gets heard and who gets silenced. You go home tonight and blow up, yelling, throwing things, all of it. By tomorrow morning, she's got the story locked down. You're the angry husband who lost his mind over a medical decision. She's the scared wife who was just trying to have a baby. She'll have your mother-in-law on speed dial, the neighbors hearing her version, and a therapist on retainer before you finish brushing your teeth. So, what are you saying? I'm saying don't give her the head start. Get a lawyer first, a real one, then decide. I picked at the label on a beer he'd handed me that I hadn't opened. You sound like you've done this before. I have done this before. My ex had a friend who was a paralegal. Soon as that friend caught wind I was unhappy, she tipped Renee off. By the time I filed, Renee had moved half the savings into her sister's account and changed the locks on the gun safe. I was playing checkers while she was playing chess. He pointed the rag at me. Get a lawyer before she gets a warning. That's all I'm going to say. I stayed in his garage until almost midnight. We didn't talk much more about it. He went back to the radio harness. I sat on that bucket and drank a beer I didn't taste. When I left, Troy walked me to my truck and stood there with his hands in his pockets while I got in. You good to drive? Yeah. All right. He knocked the roof of the truck twice with his knuckle. Call me tomorrow. I drove home. Kelsey was asleep. I stood in the bedroom doorway for a while, watching her breathe, and I thought, you have no idea what's coming, and you deserve every second of it. The next 2 days were the hardest acting I've ever done, and I'm not a man built for performance. Wednesday morning I went to work, came home at the usual time. Kelsey had made chicken and rice, one of her 3 reliable dinners. We sat at the kitchen table, same as always, and she talked about her day, some issue with a new hire who'd already filed a complaint, and I nodded and chewed and said the things a husband says. Then she brought up the IVF. Our appointment was the 16th, 6 days away. I have a really good feeling about this round, she said, leaning forward, both hands wrapped around her water glass. The new protocol, the progesterone supplements. Dr. Adler said the numbers look better this time. I watched her face while she said it. The little crinkle between her eyebrows she gets when she's being earnest. The slight tilt of her head, and I realized this woman has been performing for months, maybe longer, and she's good at it. She's seamless. If I hadn't seen those emails, I'd be sitting here feeling hopeful, reaching across the table for her hand, thinking this time, maybe this time. I hope so, I said. She smiled. I smiled back. 2 people in a kitchen pretending the ground beneath them was solid. That night, while she was in the shower, I looked at the calendar on the fridge. We kept a shared one, color-coded, because Kelsey loved systems. And I noticed something. On October 16th, the same day as our IVF appointment at Cleveland Reproductive, there was a note in her handwriting, Hair, Nicole, 10 a.m. I pulled out my phone and flipped through the screenshots. Her appointment at the Akron Clinic, Lakeview Fertilities, was scheduled for October 15th. The day before our IVF, she'd built an alibi. If the IVF failed, which, let's be honest, she was counting on, she already had the Akron procedure done the day before. And the hair appointment on the 16th meant she had a reason to be gone from the house that morning in case anyone asked questions later about timing. If she got pregnant, the dates would line up close enough. Nobody would question it. Not me, not the doctor, not anyone. This wasn't a panicked decision by a desperate woman. This was a project plan, milestones, contingencies, cover stories. She'd probably have put it on a Gantt chart if she thought I wouldn't see it. Thursday night, we were in bed. Lights off. She reached across and found my hand under the covers. Laced her fingers through mine, I let her. I stared at the ceiling and felt her thumb tracing circles on my knuckle, and I made myself a promise. This is the last time I pretend. Tomorrow, I go to war. I took a half-day Friday, told my supervisor the elevator at a school in Euclid needed a follow-up inspection, which it didn't, but I'm the kind of guy whose word isn't questioned because I've never given anyone a reason to question it. Diana Pratt's office was on Superior Avenue downtown, not the kind of place you'd see on a billboard. No mahogany desk, no leather chairs, no wall of framed diplomas. Laminate desk, a plant that was losing its argument with life, fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency I could identify from 20 years of working in mechanical rooms. But the woman behind the desk had a mind that could cut glass. She was maybe 53, short gray hair, a pen tucked behind one ear like she'd forgotten it was there. She shook my hand once, firm, and gestured at the chair across from her. "Tell me," I told her, and then I showed her the screenshots. She scrolled through them on my phone, her face absolutely still. When she finished, she set the phone down and looked at me over her glasses. "Is there anything else I should know?" "Like what? Abuse, addiction, infidelity, the conventional kind?" "No, none of that. I thought we were happy. I thought we were a team." She nodded, the way you nod when someone confirms a diagnosis you already suspected. Then she walked me through the situation. "Your wife hasn't broken any law. Using a donor isn't illegal, and deception within a marriage isn't criminal. But here's what matters." She pulled a legal pad toward her and wrote a number on it. Section 3111.03. In Ohio, any child born during a marriage is presumed to be the husband's. You understand what that means? It means if she gets pregnant before I file, you'd be the legal father. You'd have to contest paternity in court. It's expensive, it's slow, and it's humiliating. And in the meantime, you're on the hook for everything. That number, 3111.03, felt like a countdown timer. Every day I stayed married and she was out there with her Akron plan active, I was one procedure away from being legally bound to a child that was never mine. "File Monday," Diana said. "Don't tell her. Have the papers served at her workplace." Why the workplace? 2 reasons. First, it prevents a private confrontation where she controls the environment and the narrative. In her own kitchen, she can cry, bargain, reframe, gaslight, whatever her skill set allows. In a public professional setting, her options narrow significantly. She paused. Second, and I say this as a strategist, not as a cruel person, your wife is an HR manager. Her entire professional identity is built on composure and institutional authority. Being handed divorce papers in front of her colleagues disrupts that identity at its foundation. She'll be too shaken to plan. You need that window. I signed the retainer, wrote a check for $2,500 from my personal account, money I'd been putting away to replace the transmission in my truck, which had been slipping since August. Diana walked me to the door. "One more thing," she said. "Does your wife confide in anyone? A friend? A parent?" "Her mother. They talk every day." Diana's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes, the way a chess player looks when a new piece enters the board. "Good to know," she said. Monday, October 14th. 2 days before the IVF appointment that was never going to matter, and 1 day before her Akron appointment, which, as it turned out, wouldn't matter either. I chose my job for the day with care. The terminal tower has a service elevator that runs the full depth of the building, 140 feet underground, into the old rail tunnels. Once you're down there, your phone is a paperweight. No signal, no reception, no temptation. I signed in at 7 a.m., and I rode that elevator down into the dark. And I spent the morning doing routine maintenance on a motor assembly that was running fine, taking my time with every bolt, every cable tension reading, every grease point. I was thorough. I was precise. I was exactly where I needed to be. At 10:47 a.m., I learned this later from the process server's timestamp, A man in a gray jacket walked into the insurance company where Kelsey worked. He asked for Kelsey Hoffman at the front desk. She came out of a meeting room professional smile, probably thinking it was a courier. She was wearing the blue blazer she always wore on Mondays, the one with the brass buttons. She signed for the envelope, and then she opened it. I surfaced at 12:22 p.m., climbed out of the shaft, walked to the locker room, opened my locker. 14 missed calls, 6 voicemails, 23 texts. I scrolled through them, standing there in my coveralls, dust from the tunnel still on my boots. The first one, "What is this?" Then, "Nate, please call me." Then, "We have IVF in 2 days." Then, "Are you out of your mind?" Then, lower, smaller, "Please, please call me." Then, "I'm coming home. Be there." I didn't go home. I drove to Troy's. We sat on his back porch in the October cold, each holding a beer we weren't really drinking. He didn't ask questions. He'd been waiting for this day since I showed up in his garage the week before. At 5:48 p.m., I called her. I'd thought about this call for 6 days. I'd rehearsed it in my truck, in the shower, in the elevator shaft. I knew exactly what I was going to say and exactly what I wasn't. I was not going to yell. I was not going to cry. I was going to be calm, clear, and final, because that's the one thing she would never expect from me, and because it's the one thing you can't argue with. She picked up on the first ring. "Nate, oh God, what is happening? What is happening? We're supposed to be starting our family. We have the appointment on Wednesday. I saw the email from Lakeview Fertility in Akron." She stopped. Just stopped, like someone pulled the plug. "Donor number 4471, I said, 61, blue eyes, MBA, Scandinavian." 5 seconds of silence. I counted them. "Nate, I can explain. You've been talking to them since July, 3 months. You picked a donor who looks nothing like me, thinks nothing like me, is everything you apparently wish I was. And you planned to time the procedure so I'd think our IVF finally worked. You were going to let me stand in that delivery room and cry, 'Kelsey.' You were going to let me cut the cord and hold that baby to my chest and believe it was mine, and every second of it would have been a lie. That's not It was about genetics, compatibility. The doctor said." "Which doctor?" Silence. "Because I called Cleveland Reproductive. I talked to Dr. Adler's office." More silence. "He never recommended donor sperm for our case. He recommended the new protocol, the one we agreed to try." "You made that up, Kelsey. You invented a medical justification for something you planned behind my back." "Yeah, I'd done that. On Thursday during my lunch break, I called the clinic and asked the nurse a simple question. 'Has Dr. Adler ever recommended donor sperm for our case?' She checked the file and said no. She said our plan was the modified protocol with the progesterone supplements. That was it. I went into this call with every exit sealed. On the other end of the phone, something broke. The composure, the polish, the HR manager armor. I could hear it cracking. She was crying now, and it was real crying, not the kind she did when she wanted me to agree to something. "I panicked," she said. "I was terrified. 2 rounds, Nate, 2 rounds that failed, and I'm 35, and every month that goes by, I just thought if I could get pregnant any way at all, we'd be happy. I thought once the baby was here, none of it would matter. You didn't choose a random donor." "What?" "You didn't close your eyes and point at a list. You shopped. 6'1", blue eyes, MBA, piano. You built a man on a spreadsheet and decided he'd make a better father than me, at least on paper. That's not panic, Kelsey. That's a decision. I chose those traits because I thought they'd give our child the best chance. Our child. You keep saying our. There's no our in a plan where you erase half of me." Silence. I could hear her breathing, ragged, wet. My lawyer's name is Diana Pratt. Her number's in the paperwork. Don't call me again. Call her." I hung up. Troy was standing in the doorway behind me. He'd heard all of it. He didn't say a word. He just handed me a fresh beer and sat back down. Things moved fast after that, and they moved ugly. Kelsey stayed in the house. I moved into a furnished studio in Tremont, month to month, $9.50 a month, paid from my own checking account. The place was the size of a motel room. Bed, desk, hot plate, a window that looked out on a brick wall. I didn't care. It was mine, and it was honest, and that was enough. Within 3 days, Kelsey started working the phone. Her first call was to my father, Ray Hoffman, 64 years old, retired, spent 30 years running the boiler room at Metro Health Medical Center, the kind of job where nobody knows your name until the heat goes out. Lived alone in a little house in Parma since my mom died. He's not a talker, never has been. He'll go an entire Sunday dinner saying maybe 30 words, and 20 of them will be about the Browns. But when he does open his mouth, it lands like a 9-pound hammer. Kelsey called him and told him I was abandoning their family over a misunderstanding. She said the donor was a medical backup suggested by our doctor, and that I'd overreacted. She cried. She deployed the voice she uses when she wants someone to feel protective of her, softer, a little breathless, a slight waver. I know the voice. I married the voice, Dad called me that evening. "That wife of yours called me," he said. "I figured she would." Told me her side, sounded rehearsed. A pause. I could hear his TV in the background. Wheel of Fortune, like always. "What's the real story?" I told him. No dressing, no drama. Just the facts. He was quiet for a long time, longer than normal even for him. I could hear the wheels spinning on the TV, someone buying a vowel. Then he said, "Your mother and I had trouble having you. 3 years we tried. Doc brought up a donor once back in '86. Your mother sat me down at the kitchen table and told me. We talked about it for a week. Decided against it. Had you the old-fashioned way, 8 months later." He cleared his throat. "But she told me, Nate. She didn't sneak around. She didn't pick out some stranger because she thought I wasn't good enough. She sat me down and she told me. That's the whole difference right there." 2 hours later, he showed up at my studio with a bag of groceries, bread, lunch meat, bananas, a 6-pack of the cheap stuff he's been drinking since 1978. He put it all on the counter without a word, looked around the room, nodded once, not approval, just acknowledgement, and left. Kelsey's second move was her mother, Diane Porter, managed the front office of an orthopedic surgery practice for 30 years, the kind of woman who ran a waiting room like a courtroom and never let anyone forget it. She and Kelsey had always been tight, too tight, in a way I'd noticed but never challenged because I figured it wasn't my place. They talked every day, sometimes twice. Diane had never liked me. She never said it out loud, but I could feel it in every conversation, every holiday dinner, every time she looked at my work boots by the front door, and her lips got just a little thinner. Kelsey told her mother some cleaned-up version of events, and Diane called me directly. Didn't ask how I was, didn't ask for my side. She started right in. "You're throwing away a marriage because of a medical procedure. Kelsey did this for you, for your family. A lot of couples use donors, Nate, and they don't blow up their marriages over it." I let her finish. Then I said, "She chose a donor who's everything I'm not. She hid it for 3 months. She was going to trick me into thinking a stranger's child was mine. If you think that's a gift, Diane, then I understand where Kelsey learned to lie." She hung up on me, never called again. Honestly, that was the best outcome I could have hoped for from that conversation. But Kelsey wasn't done. Her third move was the one that almost got to me. She booked a session with a couples therapist, a woman named Dr. Ingram, and sent me an email begging me to attend. Just one session. That's all she asked. I called Diana Pratt. "Go," Diana said. "Be calm, be reasonable, say measured things. If this goes to a contested hearing, the judge wants to see that you made an effort. Go once. Don't go twice." October 22nd, Dr. Ingram's office. Soft lighting, tissue boxes everywhere, a white noise machine humming by the door. Kelsey was already there when I walked in. She looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. She'd been crying, not right then, but recently. Her eyes were swollen. The therapist opened with the standard framing. She called it a communication breakdown. She used the word rupture. She asked us each to share our feelings using I statements. The whole thing felt like a corporate seminar for a marriage that had been gutted. Kelsey talked. She cried. She said she'd been desperate and lost. She said the pressure of infertility had broken something inside her. She said she'd made a terrible decision from a place of fear. She said she still loved me. I sat and listened. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I looked at Kelsey and I said, "I want to ask you something. If the roles were reversed, if I had secretly arranged to have a child using another woman's egg, if I'd picked a donor who was taller, thinner, younger, and more educated than you, and I'd planned to let you carry that baby and deliver it and bond with it, believing it was yours, would you call that a communication breakdown?" The room went very still. The white noise machine sounded like a jet engine. "Or would you call it what it is?" Kelsey stared at me. The therapist stared at me. Nobody spoke. I stood up. I thanked Dr. Ingram for her time. I walked out. I did not go back. Diana Pratt was worth every cent of her retainer. During discovery, she subpoenaed the financial records. And that's when the second floor dropped out, because the first betrayal was emotional, but this one was about money, and money is the language courts speak. Kelsey had already paid the Akron clinic, a deposit of $4,500. From our joint savings account, the same account I'd been pouring money into for 3 years to cover IVF costs. So, let me do the math for you. I was working 60-hour weeks, picking up weekend service calls, skipping new boots when I needed them, brown bagging my lunch every day, all so we could afford to try to have a baby. And part of that money was going to a clinic I'd never heard of, to buy a stranger's genetic material to replace mine. I was funding my own erasure, but that wasn't the worst of it. Diana dug deeper. That third IVF round we'd agreed to, the one scheduled for October 16th, $22,000, Kelsey had already been told by Dr. Adler that the new protocol had roughly a 14% success rate for our specific case. 14%. She agreed to it immediately. She was enthusiastic about it because it was never supposed to work. The IVF was the cover story. She needed a recent, plausible procedure on the record so that when she got pregnant from the Akron donor, the timeline would hold up. The $22,000 wasn't an investment in our family. It was the price of her alibi. I sat in my studio that night looking at 5 years of credit card statements I'd pulled from the filing cabinet before I left the house. Every copay, every injection kit, every hotel room near the clinic for early morning appointments. I'd carried every one of those charges willingly. I'd have carried more. I'd have sold my truck if it meant holding our child. And the last round, the big one, the expensive one, was never even meant to succeed. Kelsey's deposition was on November 12th. Diana ran it. Kelsey's lawyer was a younger guy named Patrick Novak. Clean suit, gelled hair, the kind of attorney who handles cookie-cutter divorces, asset splits, custody schedules, alimony calculations. He clearly walked into this expecting the standard playbook. He did not expect Diana Pratt to have 12 screenshots, 3 months of clinic correspondence, the financial records, and a verified statement from Dr. Adler's office. I wasn't in the room. Ohio doesn't require the opposing spouse to attend a deposition. But Diana told me afterward, and Troy drove me to the building, and he was waiting in the parking lot when I came down. Diana asked Kelsey to confirm the donor selection. She confirmed it. Diana asked if she'd informed me. She said no. Diana asked if she'd ever intended to tell me. Kelsey hesitated. Novak objected. Diana rephrased. Kelsey said, "I was going to tell him when the time was right," Diana said. "When would the time have been right, Mrs. Hoffman? After the child was born? After it started kindergarten? After it asked why it doesn't look like its father?" Kelsey didn't answer. Novak called for a break. When they came back, Diana put one more thing on the table, a text message exchange between Kelsey and her mother, pulled from the phone records during discovery, dated late August, 6 weeks before I found the emails. Kelsey had written, "Mom, do you think I'm doing the right thing?" Diane Porter, "You're doing what's best for your child. Nate doesn't need to know everything. Men don't handle these things well." Kelsey, "What if he finds out?" Diane Porter, "He won't. And even if he does, once the baby is here, he'll love it. That's how men work." The woman who called me to lecture about throwing away a marriage, the woman who told me Kelsey did this for my family, was in on it from the start. She wasn't just aware, she was coaching it. Diana told me Kelsey went pale when those texts came up on the screen. Novak asked for another break. The deposition ended shortly after. Troy saw my face when I came downstairs. I must have looked like something carved from granite, because he didn't say a single word the whole drive home. He just drove. Here's the thing about consequences. People think revenge is a bomb you throw, but the real damage, the kind that actually changes someone's life, is structural. You pull one beam and the whole building shifts. I pulled one beam. I had her served at work. That was my one deliberate, aggressive act. Everything after that was gravity. The divorce became semi-public at her office. Not because I told anyone. I never made a single phone call, never sent a single message. But when an HR manager gets handed divorce papers in the reception area at 10:47 on a Monday morning, people notice. And when that HR manager spends the next 2 months visibly falling apart, missing deadlines, leaving meetings to cry in the bathroom, snapping at colleagues over nothing, people talk. That's just how offices work. I've been in enough mechanical rooms to know you can hear everything through the vents. In December, she mishandled a discrimination complaint. Not on purpose, she was just distracted, overloaded, running on fumes. The company put her on a performance improvement plan, a PIP. The irony of an HR manager being PIP'd by her own department was the kind of thing I might have laughed at in another life, but I didn't laugh. I didn't feel anything about it at all. She texted me one last time before I blocked her number. "You did this. You had me served at my job on purpose." I typed back, "I had you served at your job because you lied to me at home. I needed one place in your life where you couldn't control the story." Then I blocked her on everything except email, which Diana said I had to keep open for legal communication. That was the last conversation we ever had that wasn't through lawyers. The final hearing was January 14th, Cuyahoga County Domestic Relations Court. 3 months and 6 days after I sat in my truck in the driveway and stared at a sprinkler. No children, no custody fight, just money. The $44,000 in IVF debt. Diana argued that the last round, $22 grand, was agreed to by me under false pretenses, because Kelsey was simultaneously running a parallel plan and intended the IVF to serve as cover, not as a genuine attempt. She presented the emails, the Akron payments, and the statement from Dr. Adler. She argued the $4,500 Akron deposit was marital waste, money taken from a joint account for a deceptive, unilateral purpose. Novak argued both spouses participated willingly in IVF and should split the debt down the middle. The judge didn't agree. She assigned 70% of the total IVF debt to Kelsey and 30% to me. She ordered the Akron deposit reimbursed. The house was to be sold, proceeds split even. When the ruling on the debt came down, Kelsey looked at me. And for the first time in all of this, the crying, the phone calls, the therapy, the deposition, the performance stopped. There was no angle being worked, no narrative being shaped, just the naked face of a woman realizing that the man she thought she could fool had been 3 moves ahead since the kitchen table. I shook Diana's hand. I walked out of the courtroom. Troy was in the parking lot leaning against his truck in the January cold, hands deep in his jacket. How'd it go? It's done. How are you? I stood there in the gray Ohio afternoon, breath coming out in clouds. I spent 9 years trying to be a father. I'm 37, divorced, and I don't have a single child. You're 37, not 67. We stood there a while longer. Troy didn't try to fix it. He just stood next to me, and the parking lot was quiet, and that was enough. A week after the divorce was finalized, Kelsey sent me an email, a long one. I read it sitting on the bed in my studio apartment, still in my work clothes. She said she was wrong. She said her mother was wrong. She said she destroyed the best thing in her life. She said she'd been in therapy, that she was starting to understand things about herself that scared her. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for a second chance. She just asked for acknowledgement, some sign that I'd read it, that I'd heard her. I read it twice, then I deleted it, not out of cruelty. There just wasn't anything left to say. The door was closed, the elevator had reached the ground floor, and I wasn't going back up. 18 months went by. I know people expect some dramatic transformation here. The divorced guy who finds God, or starts running marathons, or moves to Montana and writes a memoir. That's not what happened. What happened was smaller and harder than that. I got promoted, lead technician, small raise, $74,000, which meant I could afford a 1-bedroom in Ohio City instead of the Tremont studio. The new place had a window that looked out on actual trees instead of a brick wall. Progress. I started cooking, not well. My dad gave me my mother's recipe box, a little wooden thing with index cards in her handwriting, stained with grease and tomato sauce. I tried her meatloaf. It was awful, truly terrible. I made it again the following week, slightly less terrible. The week after that, almost edible. I kept at it because that's what I know how to do. You diagnose the problem, you adjust, you try again. I paid off my share of the IVF debt, $13,200, in 11 months. Weekend maintenance calls, emergency service, overtime. I'd come home on Saturday nights with cable grease under my fingernails and sign into my bank app and make another payment. Every payment felt like pulling a nail out of my palm. By September, the account was zero. Clean. I went to 1 therapy session, just 1, not because I was breaking down, but because there was a question that had been circling my head like a bird that won't land. How did I not see it? The therapist, a calm, tired-looking guy with a beard, listened to the short version and said, "You didn't see the signs because you trusted her. That's not a failure. That's what marriage is supposed to be. You did the right thing, she didn't." I didn't go back. I didn't need to. I just needed to hear it once. Somewhere during that stretch, I don't remember exactly when, Troy mentioned that he'd heard through someone who knew someone that Kelsey had left her job at the insurance company, moved to Columbus, wasn't with anyone. I registered the information the way you'd register news about a city you used to live in. Mild interest, no pull, just geography. September, 2 years after the divorce. A neighborhood block party in Ohio City. One of those things where somebody closes off the street and there's a folding table with hot dogs, and someone's uncle is playing classic rock from a Bluetooth speaker that's not loud enough. I almost didn't go. Troy was out of town, my dad doesn't do block parties, and I'm not the kind of guy who mingles naturally. But my neighbor, an older guy named Walt, who'd been pestering me about it for a week, practically dragged me out the door. I was standing by the cooler, holding a hot dog I didn't particularly want, when a little girl walked up to me and said, with the absolute certainty that only a 4-year-old can muster, "You're tall." I looked down. She was small, dark-haired, wearing a purple shirt with a dinosaur on it. "Not really," I said, "taller than me." "That's true." A woman appeared behind her, olive skin, dark hair pulled back, a look on her face that was half amused and half apologetic. "Mila, you can't just walk up to strangers and comment on their height." I didn't comment. I stated a fact. The woman looked at me. "I'm sorry. She's going through a phase where she says everything she thinks." "That's not a phase," I said. "That's a gift." She laughed. And it was one of those laughs that wasn't performing anything. Not flirtation, not social obligation, not image management, just a person who thought something was funny. Her name was Lucia Vega, 32, second-grade teacher, divorced 2 years from a man who decided he wanted a different life. No villain in that story, just two people who grew in different directions. She'd moved to Ohio City for the schools and the quiet and the fact that the rent was almost reasonable if you didn't mind street parking. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. She asked what I did. I told her I worked on elevators. "Mila thinks elevators are magic," she said. "She's not entirely wrong." That was it. That was the whole first conversation. But I thought about it for 3 days afterward, which is how I knew it mattered. Second time was a coffee shop. She'd given me her number at the block party, and I'd sat on it for a week before texting, which Troy said was too long, and my dad said was about right. We met on a Saturday morning at a place on West 25th that was small enough that you couldn't avoid eye contact. We talked for 3 hours. She didn't ask about my marriage. I didn't ask about hers. We talked about Cleveland, about her kids at school, about a documentary on deep-sea creatures that we'd both seen and both been weirdly moved by. She was calm in a way that I'd forgotten people could be, not performing calm, not strategically calm, just settled, like someone who'd already been through the hard part and come out the other side without needing to prove anything about it. Third time, I drove to her apartment for dinner. She met me at the door looking flustered. "My babysitter canceled. Mila's here. I'm sorry. We can reschedule." "I don't mind." She looked at me for a beat, trying to figure out if I meant it. I meant it. So the three of us ate pasta at her kitchen table, and Mila told me a long, winding story about a frog she'd seen at recess that may or may not have been a prince. And Lucia kept mouthing sorry at me from across the table, and I kept shaking my head, because this was the least sorry I'd felt in 2 years. After dinner, Mila pulled a piece of paper from a stack on the counter and thrust it at me. A crayon drawing, wild lines, crazy colors, the kind of fearless art that only happens before someone tells you to stay inside the lines. I studied it the way I'd study a wiring schematic, gave it proper attention. "Is that an elevator?" "No!" She was outraged. "It's a rocket. You know what? I fix things that look a lot like rockets." Her eyes went wide, the way a kid's eyes go wide when the world suddenly gets bigger. "Can you show me?" I looked at Lucia. She was leaning against the kitchen counter, coffee mug in both hands, watching us, and she was smiling, but not the way I'd seen smiles for 9 years. Not calculated, not curated, not designed to communicate something specific to a specific audience. It was the kind of smile that happens when you're not thinking about your face at all. A few weeks later, a Saturday morning, I took Mila to my company's maintenance yard. Lucia dropped her off with a backpack full of juice boxes and a look that said, "If anything happens to her, I will end you," which is exactly the look a mother should give. The yard was mostly empty. Weekend. I walked Mila past the parts bins and the hydraulic lifts to a spool of elevator cable sitting on a pallet near the back wall. Thick steel, braided, heavy. I cut off a short piece with the bolt cutters and held it out for her. You know what keeps an elevator from falling? Magic. This. I turned the cable in my hand so she could see the weave. See all these little wires? Each one by itself isn't that strong. I could bend one with my fingers, but you twist them together over and over, and they hold up thousands of pounds. The whole elevator, the people inside, everything, because they're braided. Mila touched the cable with one finger. It's scratchy. Yeah, it's not pretty, but it works. She thought about this with the seriousness of a 4-year-old confronting real information. Then she said, "Can I draw it?" I pulled my work notebook from my back pocket and handed her a pencil. She sat down right there on the concrete floor, notebook on her knees, and started drawing. It looked nothing like a cable. It looked like a tornado, or a strand of DNA, or maybe just the wild, happy scribble of a kid who feels safe. "That's perfect," I said. "I meant it."